Hi Casibang's crew, we are back with our last video for Unit 2. This is our video on intelligence. So here we're going to learn about how we define intelligence, what types of intelligences we have, and how we measure and assess intelligence. So let's get started. So here's our textbook definition for intelligence. It is simply our ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and use knowledge to adapt to new situations. There are a couple of theories from prominent psychologists about what intelligence is. The first theory that we're going to talk about is Spearman's theory, and he quite simply divided intelligence into two different types of intelligence. First one is G factor, and this is just your day-to-day ability to solve problems, what he called general intelligence. That's where the G comes from, general intelligence. The second type was S factor. This is a specific type of intelligence that allows you to excel in specific areas. So for example, music or mathematics or science. And this one he called specific intelligence. Again, that's where that S comes from. Then we have Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. He said that we definitely had more than just two intelligences, more than just general and specific. He actually said that we have 8 different types of intelligence. And on this slide here, this shows you the 8 different types. He did add a 9th on here later in his life, but I really just want you guys to know the 8. And they are linguistic, verbal, linguistic, musical, logical or mathematical, visual or spatial, movement, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalist. So make sure that you write these down with a very brief description on your video notes. The potential problem with Gardner's is that it is such a well-liked theory that it is used quite often, particularly in education. And it's used like as an exclusive type of intelligence. So you guys have probably taken some sort of multiple intelligence quiz. Teachers like to do it as, the getting to know you, the first days of school kind of thing. And in education, they like to tell teachers, figure out what intelligence your kids have and make sure that you are you're designing your lessons around those types of intelligences. And it's very sort of exclusive. It's saying that you only have one type of intelligence or you can only learn one specific kind of way. And that is really not what Gardner had said with his theories. He said that there might be a type of intelligence that you prefer or that you excel at, but that you can learn in all of these different types of ways. So just because you might take an intelligence quiz that says you are musically inclined doesn't mean that everything has to be set to music or in like musical time in order for you to learn it. It just means that that's the way that you prefer to learn it. So this sort of exclusivity and sort of narrow-mindedness that has sort of taken over Gardner's and multiple intelligences is one of the huge criticisms. The third type of intelligence that we're going to talk about is the triarchic theory of intelligence. And Robert Sternberg came up with this theory. He said there were 3 different types of intelligences. So we went from 2 to 8 to 3. So his theory is that we have 3 different types of intelligence: creative intelligence, analytical intelligence, and practical intelligence. So our creative intelligence is our ability to come up with new and novel solutions to problems. Analytical intelligence is being able to break down a big problem into its smaller component parts and thereby solving that problem. So I always think mathematical when I think of analytical intelligence. And then the last one is practical intelligence. And this is just the ability to use information that you've gotten from any source to be able to get along in life and be successful. This practical intelligence is sometimes called street smarts. Okay, you've probably heard of people being described as book smart and street smart. Book smart being, that they do well in school and they get all of the test kind of things and they're able to remember a lot of that stuff. And street smart is just that ability to take any information from any experience that you have and use all of that to make yourself successful in the world. So those were the types of intelligence that Sternberg said that we had. Are there different types of intelligences, multiple types of intelligences? When we talk about this, we talk about things like social intelligence. So being able to manipulate or move around in social situations and manage yourself very successfully in those social situations. Also emotional intelligence. Are you able to express and regulate your own emotions, but not only that, but be able to interpret and understand emotions from other people? When we talk about intelligence, we talk about savant syndrome. So this is a person who has a very limited mental ability, would be considered intelligent, developmentally delayed, but has an exceptional ability in a specific area. So this could be mathematics, it could be music, it could be art. So that is called savant syndrome. So intelligence testing, how did this come about? This gentleman here is Alfred Binet, and he is credited with creating the first intelligence test that we still use a form of it today. So intelligence testing is just assessing your individual mental aptitude and then, of course, comparing it to other people. So the Stanford Binet intelligence test is the most widely used in the United States, and it is slightly revised from Binet's originally version, and it was revised by Stanley Terman at Stanford University, and so it's now called the Stanford Binet intelligence test. Binet used a concept called mental age, and this was how he wanted to be able to get intelligence to a numerical score. So mental age is the chronological age, so your age in years and months, that most typically corresponds to a particular level of performance. So the average level of performance. So a child who takes an intelligence test and scores as well as students that are 8 years old are said to have the mental age of an 8-year-old. So here is that equation that gets your IQ, your intelligence quotient. So it is the ratio of your mental age to your chronological age multiplied by 100. So if we take the previous example and you are an 8-year-old child and you score at the average mental ability of an 8-year-old, it would be 8 over 8 times 100, which gives you an average performance score of 100. So if you take an intelligence test and you have an average score of 100, that means that you score in the average area for your age. It is important that you know this equation. You will have to be able to use it. So another way that we assess intelligence is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, abbreviated to WAIS, the WAIS. It is the most widely used intelligence test in the world, okay, worldwide. It has a couple of different subtests. It has a verbal subtest, so your traditional written type of test. And then it does have performance subtests where you're actually asked to manipulate objects. So think of puzzles and things like that, things that you would have to manipulate with your hands. Here is a set of confusing pairs for us, different types of tests that are used to assess your intelligence. The first one is an aptitude test. This test is designed to predict future performance. So aptitude is just your capacity to learn. So for example, the SAT is an aptitude test. It is telling colleges your ability to learn and be successful in college. Achievement tests are tests that are designed to measure what you have learned. So every unit test that you've ever taken is an achievement test. That is just measuring, did they learn what I set out for them to learn in this unit? Intelligence tests have a couple of things that have to be present in order for them to be really effective. And the first one is this concept of standardization. So the scores have to be standard across the group. So how they do that is they have a pre-test, and that's called the standardization group. And the pre-tested individuals align scores that are going to be used for everyone else to compare to. Remember when we said intelligence testing, we said we had to get a score and then we had to compare it to other people. Oops, sorry, let me go back. And then, of course, the normal curve. Here we go, again with the normal curve. We talked about this already in research methods, but it does come up again in intelligence. The normal curve is generally how most intelligence tests are scored and standardized. So again, here's the same image of the normal curve that we did back in research methods. So this image is actually the Wechsler Intelligence Scale, where you see 68% of the people that take this test score within one standard deviation above or below the mean. And the mean, like we said before, is 100. And then 95% of the people fall within 30 points of the mean. And again, another review on skewed distributions. Another set of confusing pairs here. So we're still talking about things that intelligence tests have to have in order for them to be useful and for those scores to be taken seriously. One of them is reliability. So this is the extent that the test actually is consistent across the board. And there's three different types of reliability that we talk about. The two halves of a test, what we call a split half. So if you had a 100-question test, your score on numbers 1 through 50, and then your scores on 51 through 100 should be very similar. Right? And that just shows that your test is yielding consistent results from numbers 1 through 100. Alternate forms of the test. Okay, so most intelligence tests have different forms. So you want to make sure that scores are very similar across all the different forms of that test. If I gave you a Unit 1 test and I had Form A and Form B, and I gave Form A to 3rd and 5th period and Form B to 6th and 7th period, I want to make sure that the average scores are generally the same. Otherwise, one test might be easier or harder than the other one. And then retesting. So if we give someone a test as a 6-year-old at the beginning of 1st grade, and we give them the same test again in the middle of 1st grade, and then again at the end of 1st grade, again, we want to see similar scores. We don't want anything to be too off, because otherwise that might mean that that test is not very reliable. And then the second one is validity. Does it actually measure or predict what it is supposed to measure or predict? So this is a huge thing with the SAT right now. Does it actually predict your performance in college? Just because you get a 1350 on your SAT, does that mean that you are going to be extremely successful in college? So here's a couple of examples of reliability and or validity. So I want you to take a look at each of these examples and just write down in your notes which one this example is talking about. Is it talking about reliability or is it talking about validity? Go ahead and pause here if you need to. So to further talk about validity, we have something called content validity. So this test actually samples the behavior that is of interest. So for example, a driving test samples driving tasks, or your biology test in AP Psychology actually is testing you on the things that we learned in the bio unit and not something else that we haven't even learned yet. And then the next type of validity is predictive validity. So the test predicts the behavior that it is designed to predict. So that is like my example with the SAT. This is a concept that has come about just recently. It's called the Flynn effect. And this is the idea that came up by a researcher by the name of Flynn, that he has noticed that there has been a substantial and sustained increase in intelligence test scores from 1930 to current day. So what this means is that you have tested as more intelligent than your parents have, and your parents in turn tested more intelligent than their parents did. So for some reason, our intelligence as a population, worldwide population, has been increasing as the years go on. And one of the things that Flynn is currently testing is, why is that happening? Are we just getting better at intelligence tests? Are we getting more intelligent? Or are we just used to taking tests like this? So it shows that we're more intelligent. But you do need to know what the Flynn effect is. Cultural bias. This is another thing the SAT and ACT and tests like that come into question about, is some cultural bias. So this idea of cultural bias is that IQ tests tend to reflect language, content, culture in its examples, in its questions, and it tends to reflect these things based on the person who designs them. And guess what? Most intelligence tests are designed by middle-aged white men. So in general, the language that they're using as part of their questions, the content, sometimes even the verbiage or slang that they might be using is geared toward a middle-aged white person. So there is some cultural bias that leaves other cultures at a disadvantage when they're taking the test, which could show that their intelligence is lower than it actually is. So there is a big push to create and ensure that there are culturally fair tests. So things that use nonverbal abilities, such as the manipulation that we talked about in the Ways intelligence test. So manipulating objects, puzzles, those kind of things, so that you don't have to worry about the language and the actual verbiage that's being used, putting you at a disadvantage. When we talk about intelligence, we have to talk about the dynamics of intelligence, so the opposite ends of the spectrum. So we know from the normal scale or the normal curve that most people are going to fall right in that middle range. Okay, but what about the people at the opposite, the far ends? So the first one is an intellectual developmental disorder, and this is limited mental ability. So these would be intelligence scores below 70. Okay, so when we talked about savant syndrome, that would be these people, intelligence scores below 70, but they have a profound gift for math or for music. Down syndrome is an example of an intellectual developmental disorder. Okay, physical disorders caused by a chromosome in your genetic makeup. And then the other end of the scale are gifted. So 2% of the population falls at the upper end of the normal curve that have an IQ typically of 130 or above. And I hate to burst some of your bubbles, and I know a lot of you tested gifted when you were in elementary school. This is not the same. Okay, the tests that they gave you in elementary school are not intelligence tests like these type of intelligence tests that would say that you're gifted. There is just a very small percentage of the population that would be considered gifted. Genetic influences. So intelligence to a certain degree is genetic. To a certain degree, not completely. Okay, so we talk about this concept of heritability. So the variation, that word variation is really important. Underline that. Okay, the variation among individuals that we can attribute to our genes. So the variability here depends on the population and the environment that you grow up in. It's said that identical twins have a heritability of 0. Okay, so in general, their intelligence should be virtually the same. Okay, so this just sort of gives you a couple of comparisons of identical twins and how this heritability affects genes and your environment. Okay, so we have identical twins raised together, raised apart. Biological siblings, okay, again, raised together, raised apart, and then comparison with biological parents and their children. Okay, so that is it for intelligence, guys, and that's it for Unit 2. We have completed another unit. We are well on our way. Make sure that you complete your guided notes, that you write down at least one question about something that we talked about today, at least one, and you come into class with that tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you soon. Bye.